The Blackwood Forest stretched before me like a dark wall of green and shadow, its ancient pines reaching toward a gray October sky. As an acoustic ecologist, I'd studied forests worldwide, but something about this place was different. Even from the dirt parking lot where my old Subaru sat loaded with equipment, I could sense it. My name is Lily Weber, and I've spent the last 6 years recording and analyzing forest soundscapes. When the university approved my research grant to study the unusual acoustic properties of Blackwood Forest, I thought I'd hit the professional jackpot. The locals in Pine Haven called it the quiet zone, and preliminary studies suggested abnormal sound propagation throughout the area, perfect for my dissertation. What those studies failed to mention was the way the silence felt alive. I shouldered my basic recording kit and checked my watch, 4:15 p.m. With sunset coming early this time of year, I had about 2 hours to set up my first monitoring station. The Forest Service had given me access to an old ranger cabin about a mile in, which would serve as my base of operations for the next 6 months. "You'll want to be out before dark," Tom at the general store had warned me that morning, his weathered face creasing with concern as he rang up my supplies, especially up by the old growth section. "Ain't natural, what happens to the sound up there?" I'd smiled politely, used to local superstitions. Every small town had its folklore, its cautionary tales meant to keep visitors from wandering too far into their woods. But as I followed the overgrown trail toward the cabin, I began to understand what he meant. The normal forest sounds, birdsong, rustling leaves, the crunch of my boots on fallen pine needles, seemed to fade in and out like a badly tuned radio. I'd walk through patches where my footsteps suddenly went quiet, as if I were stepping on foam instead of the hard-packed earth. Then, just as suddenly, the sound would return to normal. The first time it happened, I stopped and deliberately scuffed my boot against the ground. Nothing, not even the whisper of fabric from my movement. My heart began to beat faster, and I could feel its rhythm in my throat, but I couldn't hear my own breathing. I fumbled for my digital recorder and hit the record button, watching the input levels. The meter showed nothing but background noise, far lower than what should be present in even the quietest forest. I spoke into the microphone. October 12th, 4:32 p.m., approximately half a mile into Blackwood Forest, experiencing unusual acoustic dampening. When I played back the recording, my voice was there but seemed to cut in and out, certain words missing entirely as if they'd been surgically removed. A chill ran down my spine despite the relatively mild temperature. The ranger cabin appeared ahead, a solid structure of logs and stone that had weathered decades of Pacific Northwest winters. It looked exactly like the photos in my briefing packet, except for the symbols carved into the doorframe. They appeared old, the edges softened by time, forming patterns that seemed almost familiar but impossible to place. I set down my equipment and dug out the keys I'd been given by the Forest Service. As I did, a sound reached me that seemed wildly out of place, children's laughter echoing from deep within the forest. I froze, key hovering near the lock. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like singing. A nursery rhyme perhaps, but the words were indistinct. Everything I knew about sound propagation in forests told me this was impossible. Sound doesn't carry this way through dense trees, and I hadn't seen any signs warning about nearby camping areas or hiking trails. "Hello?" I called out. My voice seemed to stop dead a few feet in front of me, as if hitting an invisible wall. The singing stopped. The forest fell into a silence so complete it made my ears ring. Even the ever-present whisper of wind through pine needles had ceased. I quickly unlocked the cabin door and hurried inside, slamming it behind me. The sound of the door hitting the frame echoed normally within the cabin's walls, and I let out a shaky breath. Scientific training warred with instinct as I tried to rationalize what I'd just experienced. Sound doesn't just stop. It can be absorbed, reflected, or transformed, but the way it simply vanished out there defied everything I knew about acoustics. The cabin's interior was basic but well maintained. A main room with a small kitchen area, a bedroom off to one side, and an office space that would serve as my research station. As I began unpacking my equipment, I found myself repeatedly glancing at the windows, where the forest had grown noticeably darker. I set up my primary recording array, 4 high-sensitivity microphones arranged in a tetrahedral pattern, connected to a multi-channel recorder that would capture even the slightest sound. The baseline readings I got were bizarre. Even accounting for the cabin's insulation, the ambient noise level was far below what it should be. As darkness fell, I discovered another peculiarity. My cell phone showed no signal, despite the signal booster I'd installed on the cabin's roof. The satellite phone provided by the university produced nothing but static. I was effectively cut off from the outside world. I told myself this was fine. I had supplies, emergency gear, and a detailed check-in protocol with the local ranger station. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the absolute silence pressing against the cabin walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into something far stranger and more dangerous than a simple acoustic anomaly. Just before sleep took me, I heard it again, distant singing, too faint to make out the words. But this time, it seemed to come from directly beneath the cabin's floor. The first light of dawn brought no bird song. I'd left my recording equipment running overnight, and as I reviewed the data over my morning coffee, my hands began to shake. The readings made no sense. Throughout the night, the ambient noise level had dropped to 0 several times. Not just quiet, but complete silence. In a forest, this is impossible. There's always something: wind, insects, small animals, the movement of trees. But here, nothing. More disturbing were the anomalous audio spikes that occurred during these silent periods. When I played them back, I heard what sounded like whispers in an unknown language, followed by that same children's singing from yesterday. The timestamp showed these events happened at precisely 3:33 a.m. I needed to understand the scope of this phenomenon. After a quick breakfast, I packed my day kit with additional sensors and headed deeper into the forest. The morning fog clung to the trees, creating corridors of gray between the massive trunks. I marked my trail with surveyor's tape, though the GPS unit on my belt provided some comfort. About 2 miles in, I found the first dead zone. One moment I was walking normally, the next it was like someone had pressed a universal mute button. The transition was so abrupt I stumbled. Taking out my notebook, I began documenting everything. Dead zone approximately 30 feet in diameter, perfect circle, temperature drop of 15 degrees Fahrenheit within the boundary, GPS signal lost, watch stopped at 10:27 a.m. As I bent to collect soil samples, something caught my eye. Half buried in the loam was a small tape recorder, the kind popular in the 1980s. Its casing was pristine despite obvious age, with no signs of rust or decay. When I picked it up, it felt wrong, too heavy, too cold. The real shock came when I checked my watch after leaving the dead zone. It read 11:45 a.m. Somehow, I'd lost over an hour. Returning to the cabin, I found a manila envelope had been slipped under my door. Inside were photocopied pages from old local newspapers. Pine Haven Herald, June 15, 1962, local teen missing in Blackwood Forest. Thomas Mackenzie, 17, reported his younger brother Michael, 15, missing after the boy failed to return from a hiking trip. Search efforts have been hampered by unusual equipment malfunctions. Pine Haven Herald, June 16, 1985. 3 researchers vanish while studying forest phenomena. University team investigating acoustic anomalies in Blackwood Forest declared missing after 2 weeks without contact. There were more articles dating back to the 1940s. Every 23 years, like clockwork, people disappeared in these woods. The most recent case was in 2008, which meant I did the math in my head. 2008 plus 23 equals 2031. This was 2024. We were due for another cycle. The old tape recorder sat on my desk, seeming to mock me. My scientific curiosity warred with an instinctive dread. In the end, curiosity won. I popped open the compartment. The batteries showed no corrosion, looking factory new despite their age. I pressed play. At first, just silence. Then a young male voice, presumably Michael Mackenzie. Testing, testing. Mom got me this for my birthday. Pretty cool. Anyway, I'm about 2 miles into Blackwood, near the old stone circle. There's something weird about the way sound works here. When I snap my fingers, the audio cut out for exactly 3 seconds. Can't explain it. Wait, does anyone hear that singing? Hello, is someone? The recording dissolved into static, then silence, but beneath that silence, almost at the edge of hearing, was a rhythm. Not quite music, not quite language, but something ancient and wrong. A knock at the cabin door made me jump. The sun had set without my noticing, and the temperature had dropped considerably. Through the window, I could see a figure standing on my porch. Tom from the general store, his face grave. "Miss Weber," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk about my brother, Michael, and why you need to leave these woods before history repeats itself." Tom's hands trembled as he cradled the cup of coffee I'd given him. The cabin's silence seemed to press against us, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood settling. "I was 17 when it happened," he began. "Michael was always the curious one, had to know how everything worked. When he first noticed the quiet spots in the forest, he became obsessed, started spending every free moment out here with that tape recorder." Tom glanced at the device on my desk, his face paling. That's his. Where did you find it?" I explained about the dead zone, watching his reaction carefully. The articles mentioned equipment malfunctions during the search. What kind? Everything electronic just stopped. Compasses spun in circles. Even the dogs wouldn't go near certain areas. They'd just sit and howl. He leaned forward, voice dropping. But that wasn't the worst part. We kept hearing him. For days after he disappeared, we'd hear Michael calling for help. The voices always led deeper into the forest. I retrieved my laptop and showed him the audio spikes from last night. As the whispers played, Tom's eyes widened in recognition. "That's what we heard in the stone circle, right before." He stopped abruptly. "Have you been to the circle yet?" I shook my head. "Don't. The indigenous people who lived here called it the Silence Door. Their legends say it was built to keep something in, not out. They abandoned this whole area centuries ago." I pulled out the newspaper articles. "These disappearances every 23 years. What's the connection?" "The lunar cycle," Tom replied. "Every 23 years, the moon hits a specific position relative to the stone circle. The tribe's stories mentioned a hungry moon that opened doorways. We thought it was just mythology until Michael." A sudden drop in air pressure made my ears pop. Outside, the forest had gone completely still. Tom stood so quickly he knocked over his coffee cup, but neither of us heard it shatter. "It's starting again," he whispered. "The awakening." The temperature plummeted. Frost began forming on the inside of the windows, creating patterns that matched the symbols carved into the door frame. My recording equipment's displays flickered and died. Then we heard it, a child's voice, singing that same eerie melody I'd heard before, but this time I could make out the words. "Round and round the circle stands, built by ancient, forgotten hands. When the hungry moon grows high, listen close and you will die." The singing wasn't coming from outside, it was rising from beneath the floorboards. Tom's face had gone ashen. "We need to leave, now." "But my research." "Your research is exactly what they want. Every 23 years, they lure someone in, someone curious, someone who'll study the phenomenon and help it grow stronger." He grabbed my arm. "The silence isn't just stopping sound, it's stopping time itself, and it's spreading." A loud crack split the air, the first real sound we'd heard in minutes. The floorboards were beginning to separate, revealing not dirt or foundation beneath, but an impenetrable darkness that seemed to swallow all light. I quickly grabbed my laptop, the old tape recorder, and my notebook. As we rushed outside, I noticed the darkness between the trees had grown thicker, more absolute. Our footsteps made no sound as we ran toward my car. The headlights cut through the gloom, but illuminated something that made us both freeze. Standing in the road, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 children. Their clothes belonged to different eras. One wore clearly recognizable 1960s attire, another appeared to be from the 1940s. Their faces were obscured by shadow, but they were all singing that terrible nursery rhyme. Tom pushed me toward the driver's side. "Don't stop. Whatever you see, don't stop." I gunned the engine, but no sound came from it. The car moved forward anyway, against all logic. As we passed through the circle of children, they turned to watch us. In the rearview mirror, I saw their eyes reflect the tail lights like cats. We didn't speak until we reached the main road, where sound suddenly returned with an almost painful intensity. Tom slumped in his seat, looking decades older. "They'll keep calling you back," he said quietly. "Once you've heard the silence, it never lets you go. I've been fighting it for 60 years. What do? We find the others, the survivors from previous cycles. Because if we don't stop it this time, the silence will keep spreading until it swallows everything." In my pocket, Michael's tape recorder clicked on by itself, playing that haunting song one more time before falling silent forever. The Pine Haven Library was housed in a Victorian mansion that had seen better days. At 8 a.m., Tom and I sat in the archives basement, surrounded by dusty boxes and the smell of old paper. My laptop displayed a map of the forest with marked locations of the dead zones I'd found. "Here's what we know," I said, spreading out photocopied articles. 1939, 2 hikers vanish. 1962, Michael disappears. 1985, 3 researchers. 2008, a Forest Service employee and 2 campers, each incident expanding the affected area. Tom nodded, pulling out a tattered journal. "This belonged to Dr. Eleanor Price, one of the researchers from 85. Found it on my property last year, perfectly preserved like it had been placed there that day." The journal's pages contained detailed observations, equations, and drawings of the stone circle. Dr. Price had discovered that the silent zones formed a spiral pattern, expanding outward from the circle with each cycle. Her final entry was chilling. The entity feeds on vibration itself, sound, seismic waves, even atomic movement. Perfect stillness is its domain. We thought we were studying a natural phenomenon, but we were helping it map our reality. The door opens both ways. A noise from the stairs made us both jump. A woman in her 60s descended, leaning on a cane. "You must be the new researcher," she said. "I'm Rita Thorne. I've been waiting for you." Tom stood. Rita was the Forest Service employee from 2008, the only one who made it out. Rita's hand shook as she placed a USB drive on the table. "Everything I recorded is here. The patterns, the calculations, the truth about what's beneath the stone circle. But first, you need to understand what you're dealing with." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a strange mark on her forearm, a spiral pattern that seemed to shift slightly when viewed directly. "It marks those who've been touched by the silence. We can hear it calling, always. Most go back eventually. That's what happened to my colleagues." "How did you resist?" I asked. "By understanding its weakness. The entity can't create silence. It can only consume sound. That's why it needs us. Each cycle, it lures in people who will study it, document it, try to explain it. Their efforts create new vibrations, new patterns it can absorb and understand." A distant rumble shook dust from the shelves. Thunder, but the sky outside was clear. "It's growing stronger," Rita continued. "The lunar alignment is accelerating the process. Within a week, the silence will reach the town. Within a month, the entire county. Once it consumes enough sound, it can open the door completely." I played her the audio from Michael's tape recorder. Rita's face went white. "The children's song. It's not just a song, it's a formula. The rhythm, the pitch patterns. They're instructions for sealing the door. But it has to be performed in the stone circle, during the alignment." "That's suicide," Tom protested. "The circle is at the heart of its power." Rita touched her mark. "Not if we understand what we're really fighting. Sound isn't just vibration. It's the movement of reality itself. The indigenous people knew this. The stone circle isn't just a door, it's an ancient machine. And we're going to use it to trap the entity forever." Another rumble, closer this time. Through the basement window, I saw the strange darkness creeping between the trees at the edge of town. "How long do we have?" I asked. 3 days until perfect alignment. But first, we need to gather the others. There are 7 survivors still alive. The entity marked us all, and together our marks form a key." Tom looked at his brother's tape recorder. Michael was trying to tell us, all these years. Rita nodded grimly. The song is a warning, yes, but also a weapon. We just need all 7 voices to make it work. As if in response, the tape recorder began playing again, but this time, under the static and singing, I heard something else. Words in a language that made my teeth ache, and the sound of massive stones grinding against each other deep beneath the earth. The hunt for the survivors had begun, but as we left the library, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the only ones looking for them. Finding the other survivors proved more challenging than we'd expected. Each disappearance cycle had left its mark on Pine Haven, boarded up homes, broken families, and a collective silence about what really happened in the forest. Rita's list gave us a starting point. David Cooper, 1939 cycle, now 98 years old, in a nursing home outside of town. Tom Mackenzie, 1962 cycle, with us. Rita Thorne, 2008 cycle, with us. Peter Nash, 1985 cycle, local high school physics teacher. Twins Alice and Adam Wright, 1985 cycle, moved away but allegedly still alive. Lily Weber, me, newly marked. The Pine Grove nursing home smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. David Cooper sat by a window, his weathered hands tracing endless spiral patterns on his armrest. His eyes lit up with unexpected clarity when we approached. "I've been waiting," he said before we could introduce ourselves. "The silence is growing hungry again." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the same spiral mark Rita had, but his was darker, more defined, seeming to pulse with a strange rhythm. "They sent you to study the acoustics," he said, looking at me, "just like they sent the others. The forest chooses carefully. It needs minds that can understand its patterns, help it learn." "What happened to you in 1939? I asked, setting up my recorder. David's eyes went distant. "We thought we'd found a cave. My brother Jack and I were exploring the old mining claims, but it wasn't a cave, it was a throat." His fingers kept tracing spirals. Jack stepped in first. The silence. It didn't just take the sound. It took the space where sound should be, left a void that wanted to be filled. A nurse dropped a tray in the hallway, but no sound reached us. David smiled grimly. "It's starting to remember what it learned from us. Each cycle, it gets better at manipulating our reality. The children you hear singing, those aren't children. They're echoes of what it's absorbed, played back to lure in more researchers, more curious minds." "How did you escape?" Tom asked. "I didn't. None of us did. Not really. We're all still there, in a way. The marks connect us to it, but that connection works both ways." He gripped my hand suddenly, his skin cold. "You've heard the song. You know it's not just music. It's mathematics, frequencies that can lock the door." Rita stepped forward. "We need your help, David. All 7 voices." "6, he interrupted. "Alice Wright died last night." I felt it. The entity pulled her back in. "Adam won't last long without her. The twins were always connected. You need to find him quickly." The lights flickered. Outside, a shadow passed over the sun that had nothing to do with clouds. "It knows we're gathering," David whispered. "It'll try to stop us. The marks aren't just scars, they're eyes. It watches through us, listens through us." As if to confirm his words, all our phones chimed simultaneously, text messages from an unknown number showing just one line. "Round and round the circle stands." David began humming the melody, and the temperature dropped noticeably. The spiral on his arm grew darker, seeming to move under his skin. "Go," he said urgently. "Find Adam Wright. Find Peter Nash. When the hungry moon rises, bring them to the circle. I'll be there." "You can't leave the nursing home," the nurse protested from the doorway. David laughed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere far away. "I never left the forest. None of us did. We're still there, walking between the trees, being drawn closer to the center. Only our bodies made it out." As we hurried back to my car, Rita's phone GPS stopped working. The silence was spreading faster now, reaching into town in irregular pulses. We had 2 days until the lunar alignment, and somewhere out there, Adam Wright was fighting the pull of the forest alone, his twin sister's mark growing cold on her lifeless arm. The hunt for the remaining survivors would become a race against time, and against an entity that could listen through our own flesh. Finding Peter Nash proved easier than expected, but what we found chilled us to the bone. The high school parking lot was empty when we arrived, save for one car, a blue Honda with frost on the windows despite the mild October day. Nash sat in his classroom, writing complicated equations across 3 whiteboards. The formulas contained elements of quantum mechanics, acoustic physics, and something else, symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The frequency patterns are evolving, he said without turning around. Each cycle adds new dimensions to its understanding. The children's song, it's not just sound, it's a map of reality itself. His mark was visible above his collar, the spiral pattern extending up his neck like dark vines. Rita grabbed my arm in warning. Nash's eyes, when he finally faced us, were completely black. "You're too late," he said, but the voice wasn't entirely his. It carried echoes of other voices, including what I recognized as Michael Mackenzie's. "The right girl is already gone. Her brother will follow. The 7 will not gather." Tom lunged forward, grabbing Nash's shoulders. "Fight it, Peter. You helped contain it into 85. You know the song's true purpose." Nash's expression flickered, humanity briefly returning to his eyes. Adam Wright is at the old fire tower. Hurry, I can't hold it back much longer." "Come with us," Rita pleaded. "No," Nash turned back to his equations. "I have to finish this. The mathematics, they're beautiful. Perfect silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the absence of possibility itself. A void that consumes probability." The temperature plummeted. Frost patterns spread across the classroom windows, forming familiar spirals. Nash began to hum the children's song, but distorted, wrong. The mathematical precision of it twisted into something that made my teeth vibrate. We ran. The fire tower stood 3 miles from town, overlooking Blackwood Forest. The silence hit us a quarter-mile out. Not in patches anymore, but in a solid wall. Beyond it, even the sunlight seemed dimmer. Adam Wright huddled in the tower's base, rocking back and forth. The spiral mark on his arm was black and weeping a clear fluid that moved against gravity. "Alice," he whispered as we approached. "She called me home, called us both, but I won't." His eyes were normal, but filled with a terror I'd never seen before. "She died fighting it." The song, we almost understood it in 85. The indigenous people built the circle as a tuning fork. Reality resonates at certain frequencies. The entity, it's looking for the right frequency to stop everything. All motion, all possibility. Rita knelt beside him, showing her own mark. "We need your voice, Adam. All 7 to seal the door." 6, he corrected. "Nash is gone. Look." He pointed toward town. A column of perfect darkness had engulfed the high school. Within it, I could see equations floating in the air, glowing with an anti-light that hurt to look at. It took him completely, used his knowledge to evolve. "We have to hurry." Adam struggled to his feet. "The alignment is accelerating. Time moves differently in the silence now. We might have hours, not days." The drive back to town was surreal. Patches of silence had merged into flowing rivers of void, cutting off entire streets. People were beginning to notice. Cars stopped at invisible barriers, phones dead, the air growing colder. We regrouped at the library with David Cooper, who'd somehow arrived before us, despite being miles away at the nursing home. He seemed different now, more present, as if proximity to the entity had awakened something in him. "The circle at midnight," he said. "The hungry moon will be directly overhead, but we need a 7th voice to replace Nash and Alice. The resonance requires 7 points." "I know where to find one," Tom said quietly. "The tape recorder, Michael's voice. The entity has been using it to mock us, but we can use it against it." As darkness fell, the silence spread faster. The forest seemed to be breathing, pulsing with waves of void that consumed sound, light, and possibility itself. Nash's equations burned in the sky above the school, solving themselves in patterns that threatened to crack reality itself. We had hours left to prepare, racing against an intelligence that had spent decades learning our mathematics, our physics, our very concept of reality, and had found them all wanting. The hungry moon began to rise, and somewhere in the darkness, children that were not children began to sing. The moon rose bloated and wrong, its light somehow dark around the edges. By 11 p.m., half the town lay in patches of absolute silence. Cars sat abandoned on Main Street, their headlights illuminating waves of void that moved like oil on water. We gathered our equipment in the library basement. David's ancient tuning forks, Rita's frequency analyzer, Adam's twin journals, one his, one Alice's, Tom's brother's tape recorder, and my laptop containing all the acoustic data I'd gathered. The patterns were clear now. The entity hadn't just been studying sound, it had been studying us studying it. The stones align at midnight, David explained, laying out a map covered in spiral patterns. The circle acts as an amplifier. The indigenous people discovered that certain harmonics could contain the entity, trap it in a pocket of frozen time, but they could never generate enough power to seal it permanently. Until now, Rita added, each cycle, it absorbed more knowledge about acoustics, physics, mathematics. Now we can use that knowledge against it. Adam hadn't spoken for hours, but his mark had spread visibly, the spiral pattern now covering most of his arm. Alice understood it first, he whispered. The song isn't just instructions, it's a key. The children's voices are fragments of reality it couldn't quite digest, echoes of possibilities it tried to consume. We loaded everything into Rita's SUV, the largest vehicle we had. The drive to the forest's edge was tense. Patches of silence had grown so large, we had to take back roads, watching for the telltale distortion in the air that marked void zones. The forest had changed. The trees seemed to bend away from the stone circle, their branches creating spiral patterns against the dark sky. The temperature had dropped below freezing, frost creating complex mathematical patterns on every surface. As we hiked toward the circle, I noticed something horrifying. The silent zones weren't just taking sound anymore, they were taking time itself. Leaves hung suspended in mid-fall. A startled deer stood frozen between steps, its eyes wide with terror. Then we saw the children. They lined the path to the circle, 7 of them, each from a different era. Their eyes reflected the hungry moon's light, and their singing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Round and round the circle stands, built by ancient, forgotten hands. When the hungry moon grows high, listen close, and you will die. But now, we understood the true meaning. The simple lyrics masked a complex mathematical formula, frequencies that could lock reality itself. The stone circle rose before us, 12 megalithic blocks arranged around a central altar. In daylight, it might have seemed primitive. Under the hungry moon, we could see the true complexity of its engineering. The stones were covered in spiraling patterns that matched our marks, and they seemed to pulse with a deep, subsonic rhythm. "It's ready," David said, his voice distant. "The entity will try to stop us. Once we begin, we'll have one chance." We took our positions, David, Rita, Adam, Tom, and me in a pentagram pattern. The tape recorder would provide Michael's voice from the altar stone. And the 7th point. A figure emerged from the darkness. Peter Nash, his eyes completely black, equations floating around him like a halo. "Did you think I was lost?" His voice carried echoes of every person the entity had ever taken. "I understand now. Perfect silence, perfect stillness, the end of all vibration, all possibility. Why resist it?" Behind him, the void was gathering, a wall of absolute darkness that consumed everything it touched. The hungry moon reached its apex, and the stones began to sing. The stone's song was like nothing in nature, a harmonious frequency that made reality itself shiver. Our marks burned in response, the spiral patterns writhing beneath our skin. Nash stepped into the circle, his black eyes reflecting impossible equations. "You brought the knowledge I needed," the entity spoke through him. "Decades of research, sound waves, quantum mechanics, the mathematics of reality itself. Let me show you what I've learned." The void surged forward, but stopped at the circle's edge. The ancient stones held it back, their embedded patterns glowing with a pale blue light. We had minutes at most. "Now," David shouted. Tom pressed play on the tape recorder, and Michael's voice joined ours as we began to sing. "Round and round, the circle stands." The effect was immediate. The stones resonated with our voices, each one hitting a different frequency that matched the patterns in our marks. The children's simple melody transformed into something profound and terrible. seventh-dimensional harmonics that cut through layers of reality. Nash screamed, but it wasn't his voice anymore. The entity poured from his mouth in waves of mathematical symbols and broken sound. The void pressed harder against the circle's boundary. "Keep singing," Rita commanded. "The resonance pattern is building." Our marks blazed with blue fire. I felt Michael's voice through the tape recorder syncing with the rest, creating a perfect heptagonal seal. The stone's glow intensified, forming a dome of light over the circle. But something was wrong. Nash began to laugh, a sound that fractured into multiple frequencies. "You taught me harmony," the entity said through him. "Now learn discord." The void erupted through Nash's body, shattering the dome of light. The children appeared within the circle, their singing a twisted mirror of our own. Reality began to crack around us, showing glimpses of impossible spaces between moments. Adam stumbled, his mark turning black. "Alice," he whispered, "I can feel her. She's still here. They're all still here." That's when I understood. Every person the entity had taken wasn't gone. They were preserved in perfect stasis, their voices trapped in eternal silence. If we could reach them. I changed the pattern of my singing, weaving in frequencies from my research data. Rita caught on immediately, adjusting her pitch. One by one, we modified the song, not fighting the entity's discord, but incorporating it. The children's faces flickered, showing their true nature, echoes of the taken, trapped between seconds. Their singing began to align with ours. Nash convulsed as more voices joined the harmony, decades of lost souls finding their sound again. The entity thrashed within him, its perfect mathematics disrupted by the chaos of human consciousness. The hungry moon reached its absolute peak. The stone's resonance hit a critical frequency, and in that moment, every voice, living, dead, and caught between, sang as one. Reality held its breath. The void surged one final time, trying to silence everything, but our song caught it, twisted it, forced it to hear itself. The entity had spent decades learning our science, our math, our understanding of reality. Now it experienced something it couldn't quantify. Harmony born of discord, pattern born of chaos, life born of countless individual voices joining as one. The stones blazed with blinding light. The marks on our arms burned golden, and in the center of the circle, space itself began to fold. "Follow it through," David commanded. "Complete the seal." Nash's body arched impossibly as the entity tried to escape, but it was too late. The song had become a key, and reality itself had become a lock. The entity fought with every weapon it had learned from us. Quantum equations burst in the air like dark fireworks. Sound waves twisted into impossible shapes. Time itself stuttered and skipped around the circle. But our song held. Nash's body began to dissolve, not into death, but into pure mathematics. The entity's true form finally revealed. Through the equations, I saw its history, an ancient thing that had fallen through a crack in reality, seeking to understand our universe by stopping it, studying it in perfect stillness. "It's afraid," Adam gasped between verses. It never understood. Sound isn't just vibration, it's change, movement, life. The children's forms flickered faster now, showing glimpses of everyone the entity had taken. I saw Michael Mackenzie, young and scared, but singing with us. The researchers from 85, their data finally complete. Countless others, their voices joining the harmony. The hungry moon reached its apex, directly overhead. The stone's resonance peaked, their frequency matching the pure mathematics of reality itself. In that moment, I saw what the entity had been seeking all along, the fundamental equation of existence. But it wasn't an equation of silence. It was an endless song, an eternal dance of particles and possibilities. The entity had spent centuries trying to stop it, to understand it through perfect stillness. Now it was being forced to hear the true music of reality. Tom held up the tape recorder, Michael's voice growing stronger as more lost souls found their sound. Rita's frequency analyzer displayed patterns that shouldn't have been possible. Harmonics that existed in 7 dimensions at once. The void began to collapse in on itself, pulled by the stone circle's ancient power. Our marks burned gold, then white, then ultraviolet. The entity thrashed in its mathematical form, trying to escape the song that had become its prison. Now, David commanded, the final verse. We sang the last lines, but not as the simple children's rhyme. It emerged as a complex equation expressed in pure sound, the knowledge of centuries compressed into harmony. Listen close and you will die. But the word die became something else, a tone that meant transformation, change, the endless cycle of reality itself. The entity had sought to create perfect silence, eternal stillness. Instead, it became part of the very thing it had tried to stop. The stone's light reached impossible brightness. The hungry moon seemed to sing with us, and in the center of the circle where Nash's body had stood, reality folded in on itself. The void collapsed, taking the entity with it. As it vanished, it left behind one final equation, not of silence, but of sound, not of death, but of life. The children smiled, their forms resolving into pure light, and faded away. The marks on our arms flared one last time, then dissolved into ordinary scars. The stone circles glowed dim to a faint luminescence that pulsed in time with the universe's own heartbeat. In the sudden, natural silence, we heard something beautiful. A whippoorwill's call, then crickets, then the wind in the trees. Normal sounds returning to a forest that had been held in unnatural quiet for too long. But our work wasn't quite finished. As the void collapsed, it had left behind echoes, pockets of distorted space-time that needed to be resolved. And in those echoes, we could still hear voices calling for help. The sun would rise soon on a changed world. We had sealed the door, but now we had to help those who had been trapped behind it find their way home. The first light of dawn revealed what the night had changed. The stone circle no longer felt wrong. Instead, it hummed with a gentle resonance that matched the natural frequency of the forest. The hungry moon had set, leaving behind a sky that seemed somehow more vibrant, as if reality itself had been renewed. Peter Nash's body was gone, but he wasn't lost. As the void collapsed, it had released those it had taken, not into our space-time, but into the echoes. They existed now in quantum superposition, caught between moments. Our task was to help them find their way back. The echoes are like ripples in reality, Rita explained, checking her instruments. Each one contains fragments of those who were taken. We can use sound to guide them home. Over the next few days, we worked systematically through the forest. The dead zones were gone, but they left behind patches where time moved strangely. In these spaces we could hear voices, researchers working on equations that no longer existed, hikers walking trails that had changed decades ago, children playing games with rules learned from an entity that now sang with the universe instead of trying to silence it. Tom spent hours at each site, playing Michael's tape recorder. The familiar voice often drew out others, like a beacon calling them back to normal space-time. Some we could save completely. They emerged confused, but whole, carrying memories of an eternal moment where all possibilities existed at once. Others we could only partially recover. They existed like quantum ghosts, visible at certain frequencies, audible only when the wind blew just right. The Price research team chose to stay that way. They had learned too much about reality's underlying nature to fully return to normal existence. Instead, they became part of the forest's new harmony, their equations helping to maintain the seal on the entity's prison. David Cooper passed away peacefully a week after the sealing. We found him in his nursing home room, a smile on his face, his spiral scar transformed into a perfect expression of the universe's fundamental frequency. His last words were, "I can hear it all now. It's beautiful." Adam Wright recovered slowly, the loss of his twin sister a wound that would never fully heal. But in the echo spaces, he sometimes heard her voice, teaching him new songs that existed in frequencies humans had never explored before. He became the forest's guardian, mapping the places where reality had been stretched thin, ensuring no other entity could ever use them as a door. The forest changed too. The trees grew straighter, healthier, as if freed from an ancient burden. Wildlife returned in abundance. Sound moved normally through the air, but if you listened carefully, you could hear complex harmonies in the wind. The entity's knowledge transformed into music, its mathematics becoming part of nature's song. I stayed in Pine Haven, converting my research into a new field of quantum acoustics. The university didn't quite understand my papers about sound's role in maintaining reality's coherence, but other marked survivors around the world reached out. We formed a network, monitoring places where the boundaries between silence and song grew thin. The children never appeared again, but on very quiet nights, you can still hear echoes of their rhyme. It's different now, not a warning, but a celebration of sound, motion, and endless possibility. The forest remembers its time in silence, but it chooses to sing. Sometimes, walking near the stone circle at twilight, I hear impossible harmonies, the entity itself transformed and transforming, learning to dance with the universe it once tried to freeze. My scar tingles in response, reminding me that I'm part of that dance too. After all, in a universe of infinite sound and possibility, even the deepest silence is just a rest between songs.